Hi there and welcome to Stock Club. I'm Mike and joining me today's episode is MyWallSt's chief investor Emmett Savage. Every month here at MyWallSt we publish our Stock of the Month in our Invest Plus service. Stock of the Month has an unbeaten track history of success. It's up about 5x since we started the service compared to the S&P 500, which is up about 2 times that. So doing pretty well so far. Not only that, but with Invest Plus you also get our 10 foundational stocks in there, a library of 60 stocks and growing, your weekly Charging and Fearless newsletter, and if you have any room left, we're also including a bonus wildcard report on top of that as well. So for our loyal Stock Club listeners, you can get $50 off this bundle with the promo code StockClub50. That's StockClub50 in all caps, and that will get you all that for a nice little discount there. So just stick in StockClub50 all caps at checkout. Today's podcast brought to you by Vodafone Business. If you like us here at MyWallSt, you know that running a business is difficult. There are countless things to think about. Many often simply get ignored or completely forgotten about. Well, that's where Vodafone Business can help. They've crafted a suite of tools and supports to boost your business's operations. The best part is it's free for everyone, from cybersecurity to harnessing the power of AI, building a website and improving how your teams work remotely. Vodafone Business will help you address the often overlooked but crucial elements for your business's success. To get started today, check out their one-to-one VHub digital support and advice service. You'll find everything you need right there. Find the link in our show notes or simply just Google Vodafone VHub for more details. Now, let's get into today's episode.
How are you, Mike? How are you doing?
Trying to wrestle with our new podcasting recording software for the last 10 minutes, so excuse me if I'm a bit trite.
Yeah. It says on my one here, Mike, that the app is not focused. As long as we're focused, I think it's grand. I mean, I don't know what even app is not focused means. It's a meaningless message, so I'm sorry. That's an epic fail on the message front.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of different pings and warnings and all the rest around it, but I think we should be okay. We'll bomb on anyways, either way. So you have an interesting topic here you wanted to discuss, something a bit different than the usual kind of news we do week to week. So you're talking about a company everyone knows. I think it'll be the first phone for many people, and that's the Finnish telecoms giant Nokia. So why did you choose to dedicate basically an episode towards a company that for a lot of people is in the past, I suppose? What did you find so interesting about?
I'll tell you what it was. I was chatting with my son before he went to school on Monday morning, and he was telling me that a friend of his started his mobile handset life with a Nokia handset, which I think is very unusual in this day and age. But his friend, as a party piece, lashes the phone at the wall. It smashes. He reassembles the phone and then rings his mom to show it still works. And I thought even the fact that he rings his mom is quite amusing in its own right. But the reason I think the story is interesting is that if you were a conscious person in Ireland, or anywhere for that matter, in the late 1990s, you will know what a cultural giant Nokia was. It was a duopoly that's really Apple and Samsung's duopoly today. Maybe Huawei is a triopoly, but back when this was a Scandinavian pit fight, and I know that at least half of our listeners either owned an Ericsson or a Nokia phone, and I thought it would make a very interesting 15-minute walk down memory lane, as it were.
That's fair enough, yeah. So let's start from the beginning. So I imagine the beginning wasn't just everyone had their own 3310 that had polyphonic ringtones.
Well, this is why I thought the story was so interesting, because when my son was telling me about his friend throwing the Nokia at the wall, I ended up, I remembered the story very vaguely. I thought, now that, a bit like I mentioned on this podcast before, Mike, the longest continuously running commercial company in the world is the manufacturer of cymbals for drums called Zildjian, which I think is a Turkish company and a wonderful company if you ask me, but that's neither here nor there. Nokia, in my mind, was in the same bucket. So I dived in, had a look, and sure enough, its backstory is actually very interesting. So on that, I think it will come to our listeners' surprise that Nokia was actually founded in 1865, not 1965, 1865, in Finland by a mining engineer called Fredrik Edelstam, who figured that in about 130 years, people are gonna.
I was about to say, are you about to tell me he figured he needed a mobile phone back in the 19th
Yeah,
century.
with a game on it called Snake. I know what people are gonna want when I'm gone. A game called Snake. But and well, being as phones were not really a thing at that time, the company was set up as a pulp mill and named after the local town, which is called Nokia. And if you jump into Google Maps, as I did, you'll find that it's about 15 kilometers west of Tampere. And I suppose, to be kind, it's a bit on the quiet side. I couldn't foresee anyone deciding they're going to have their hen or their stag or bachelor or bachelorette party in the town of Nokia, despite the size of the brand. But good man, Frederick, you put it on the map. And I reckon times must have been good at Nokia AB, that's the company, because over the next 100 years, after he founded it and they were getting ready to do the mobile phones, they diversified into all kinds of things. They went into rubber and all kind of things that you'd manufacture at a simplistic level, but then started going to telecoms cables, and that's the clue of their future. And eventually they crept into electronics like televisions. In fact, I remember when I was young, my friend Mark in Malahide, they had a Nokia television growing up. And with that said, I never saw him lift the telly up and lash it at the wall and then reassemble it. But I do remember Nokia televisions. So by 1960s, Nokia had already begun producing mobile radio telephones, big, huge, heavy-duty things for commercial and military use. But it really wasn't until the 1970s that it started to look like the company that we know today, or at least the company we knew back in the 90s or the early 2000s, when in fact most of us had a Nokia phone. So in 1979, which is 114 years after its foundation, Nokia and Salora, which is another Finnish company, formed a joint venture called Mobria, I think it was, and they started to develop mobile phones. And this was followed very soon after by the launch of Nordic Mobile Telephone Service, NMT service. Think of Verizon or Vodafone or your mobile provider at the time. So NMT was launched, and it was the world's first international cellular network. So in the early 1980s, and if you kind of think about where we are today, this was like the birth of the connected world in which we live today. We're all tethered to our phones. A phone is an extension of ourselves, and the network is an extension of the phone. But this is where it all began, up in Finland. And it really is, to me, amazing how the industry started up there between Finland and Sweden. So Nokia introduced its first car phone, the Mobile Senator, in 1982. Very, very heavy name. It's the Senator. Even the name is of its time. But in the late 1980s, they started to focus exclusively on their telecoms business, and ultimately started divest all the other stuff they did. I don't know what they were doing, Wellington boots and, whatever, molded products. But they said telecoms is our future. Handheld phones is where it's at, and that's where they went. And this ultimately led to the launch of the Nokia. I think their first model was the 1011 in 1992, and it was the first commercially available GSM mobile phone. And to jog our listeners' memory, most countries didn't switch to GSM until around 1996, which, as far as I remember, and my memory on that subject is quite good, because when I graduated out of science in college, I was taken on as a radio engineer, and that was the first chapter of my professional life. But until that point, until GSM, the mobile phone systems around the world were using a system called TAX, which was analog. And it was actually funny, because any casual radio enthusiast could buy a little tuner and tune in and listen in to other people's conversations. But anyway, it was the 1990s, and the 1990s was Nokia's renaissance. So after 100 plus years of giving it a shot, it became the world leader in something, and it became the world leader in mobile phone industry. And the iconic model that you mentioned there, the 3310, was released, and it was known for its durability, for a long battery life, a simple user interface. I mean, look, in 2023 or 2024 now, like, a durable phone is a party piece. Like, I mean, this is for crying out loud. Yeah. We need insurance. And you buy a phone, it's like, I better get insurance. I have to buy a cover. I better stand on a mattress when I'm using it in case I drop it. And I'm going to actually employ an armed guard to mind my phone. No, not back in the 90s, man. You just basically bought your mobile, you stuck it in the pocket. If it fell out when you were in the pub, it didn't matter. You all laughed and put it back in your pocket and it still worked. But back in the 90s, Nokia was actually very well renowned for its innovation in mobile, and it developed, bright colored phones and user-friendly interfaces, and ultimately these bright colors and nice buttons and the screen lock and fancy ringtones were all novelty, and they were all and very appealing to the consumer. And at its peak, Nokia was a titan. This business was ginormous, and it was the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer for over a decade. It hit a record revenue of $51 billion in 2007, with profits of about $7.2 billion. Euros, not dollars, euros. And they employed 123,000 people around the world, which obviously had far more than a social impact. It had economic impact, especially in Finland. But you can't imagine the cultural influence of Nokia if you didn't experience. However, the rise of smartphones, especially after the iPhone launch in 2007, marked the beginning of Nokia's decline.
So is that the demise, I suppose? Is it just completely missed the boat on smartphones? Is that what went wrong?
Well, yeah, the smartphone was its Achilles heel, and as much as the downfall of the BlackBerry has been highlighted thanks to a recent movie which I recommend, I think it's called BlackBerry, unimaginatively named. The story of what happened BlackBerry is every bit as much the story of Nokia. Like Apple's iPhone, as I said, launched in 2007. In and around the same time, Android was unveiled, and no time at all, Nokia's market share fell off a cliff. And I have it written down here how precipitous a decline they actually endured. So let me tell you. So in 2007, Nokia's market share was 47%. More or less half of every mobile phones in the world was a Nokia. 1 year later, it was 41%. By the end of 2010, it was 31%. And the following year saw an even steeper decrease, I guess, as it's grappled with the kind of dwindling appeal of the Symbian platform, which was their equivalent of Android, I suppose you'd say, or iOS. And then they were also struggling to transition to the Windows Phone, which was kind of adapted through a very badly made strategic partnership with Microsoft. But anyway, from 2012 onwards, their decline persisted, and their share of the market fell to about 3%. So in 2007 they had half of every phones in the world. 2012, 3%, and that's a pretty ugly decline.
Isn't it funny how businesses you see just completely miss the boat like that is so common?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Like I'm thinking of Nokia now. You'd think of Microsoft with the search engine just to get completely undercut. Now, I know Google was a much smaller company than Apple was when it launched the iPhone, but in general, to get completely blindsided by that, it's weird how common it is amongst these dominant companies.
Disruption happens fast in every industry. It's just there. Suddenly you look up and this thing has permeated your life, and it's just displaced whatever it was you were using beforehand, and it's the way it's going to be until it's disrupted. We don't see it. There's some industries that are very, 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 very slow to be disrupted, like baked beans. I don't know when baked beans are invented, but they've been around since cowboys, and you can expect they're going to be around for another 100 years. But something's going to disrupt baked beans someday. I just don't know what it is. But like the hot example of what you just described at the moment is AI. Every software business at the moment really needs to worry about AI. I was watching this Instagram post from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, where he basically they have built an AI of him. Now, what I mean by that is there's two videos. The real Reid is on the right. The AI Reid is on the left. The AI Reid read all of his books and every one of his podcasts and every this, that, and the other, and they were indistinguishable. And my point is that even what is regarded as real human interactions, like you switch on a TV show and you might watch your favorite TV host Conan O'Brien, it won't take long. We're actually at a point now where they could replace Conan with an AI system. So disruption happens super fast. But when we bring it back to Nokia, the real thing it got wrong, I think there was two things it got wrong. There was firstly a delayed market response. They sat there and they looked at what Apple had just announced, and they also had the absence of a compelling app ecosystem. So like everyone's banging the table as soon as they saw the iPhone. We want a touchscreen and we want apps. Apps, touchscreen, apps, touchscreens. Honestly, it was like a crowd chant. We loved it. We wanted apps for everything, you know.
Do you remember? I remember there was the lighter app and the beer.
What?
Do you remember that? If you tilted the iPhone, it would
Oh,
like
I do remember that. I do. It sounded like a beer.
Yeah,
We were
yeah.
simple creatures.
That was the height of technology at the time.
And there was an Indiana Jones one as well, where you've just flicked your phone, it made the sound of Indiana Jones's whip. I mean, really, we were simple creatures. But considering we'd come from like kind of a bossa nova ringtone on Nokia, which we had made everybody we know endure as we played it for them, this was really a move forward. You could pour a beer, a whip. Is that what you say? Whip, a whip. And you're right, this was the thing. But Apple was a strategic meteorite for Nokia, as it has been for pretty much any industry it's entered. But when you look at the barren wasteland of businesses that have suffered a scorched earth, Nokia really was hurting. By 2013, Microsoft announced a plan to buy its devices and services division for about $7 billion. And the deal was completed in 2014, and Nokia's mobile phone business was integrated into Microsoft, which at that time, not so much anymore, was the death of a business. I mean, Microsoft had a good long period under Steve Ballmer where vision was sorely lacking, and then the phones and that brand that had built. I mean, anyone who is alive will remember the iconology. Is that the name for the typography? Like how those letters are written, how they sat. You know, there was just it had built an incredible brand that was utterly destroyed. Half of every phone on earth was a Nokia, and in no time at all it was 3%, 1%, 0%. So that brand died in and around 2014 for the time being. Now, post-acquisition, after Microsoft had bought Nokia, Nokia focused on its telecoms infrastructure business, known as Nokia Networks, and with it the technology development and licensing and making routers and gooters and flogging them to big mobile phone operators. But Nokia acquired another company, then the new Nokia, if you like, the slimmed down telecoms Nokia, acquired Alcatel-Lucent in 2016, which kind of gave it a boost in broadband and telecoms equipment and other routers and gooters. Now, listen to this. Last summer, I was at a wedding in Spain of a very senior telecoms guy, top of the pyramid when it comes to technology, and I was talking to a man who works in the industry, and the man told me that Nokia's future is not looking good. Now, the man had a vested interest in another party's success, but I'm only telling you what the man said because I said to him on a bus to somewhere fancy, because it was a multi-day wedding where there was so much entertainment. Honestly, I was bumping into myself getting into bed as I was getting out of it. It was like this man, I said to him, I think Nokia's got a bit of value left in it because their gear is well and truly bedded into an awful lot of American networks, which is a fact because, as we know, American networks don't like Chinese gear, and Nokia is well and truly Finnish. But I believe it ain't got a bright future. So when I look at the most recent Wall Street Journal headlines for Nokia, it kind of gives you an exact summary of the story. Just read all the headlines. If you have a subscription to Wall Street Journal, you slam in a company name and it shows you all the latest headlines about the business. And the most recent headline from the Wall Street Journal, which was on April 19th, 2024, says Nokia expects demand in mobile networks to pick up. Before that, on October 20th, 2023, Nokia to slash 14,000 jobs. Then it says Nokia starts to see green shoots despite ongoing challenges. Then AT&T snubs Nokia and strikes $14 billion supplier deal with Ericsson. So those pair are still at each other's throat. But when you look through the headlines of the business over the last couple of years, it gives you a very quick biography, as it were, of where the business is at. And the story of Nokia is one that continues. It's obviously proven its longevity and its ability to survive. But I just thought when I heard my son's mate lashes his phone at the wall and reassembles it, that it was actually a story worth telling, because you don't develop a phone that can endure that type of party piece unless you've got the pedigree.
Yeah. I know it is. It's an interesting story, and there's so many of these we could tell about what you said, just disruption in general, and how fickle especially in the technology space, businesses can be in their position.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost a word of warning, we'll
Yeah.
call it.
Yeah.
But I also thought it was interesting how Nokia phones are so known for how robust they are, because it started out as a pulp mill and it was materials for 100 years, and then they figured it out in the end.
No,
But
I'm missing a little bit in my head in the storyboard, because I'm pretty sure I saw a Nokia phone being advertised on television, or someone on TV talking about how Nokias are more suited to children because they're less susceptible to the murky depths of humanity's worst side, and the Nokia was deemed as the safe starter phone for your 7 or 8 or 9-year-old, because they're saved this kind of app world. So there's something going on in Nokia phones, and certainly nostalgia in me flared up when I saw it on television, because it did look like the first Nokia that I had way back in the mid-90s. So yeah, it's a story that continues, and as you said, disruption is always there, but survival is the name of the game in business. I mean, really, like that movie about Ray Kroc, the acquirer founder of McDonald's, or the founder of McDonald's as we know it today, not quite the founder. I think the movie starts with him looking in the mirror and he's saying something about like persistence is the key. I don't know if persistence is the word, but certainly just survive. Just survive. The first rule of first aid is keep the patient alive, because then you can improve. And I think Nokia obviously brought that mentality into their corporate DNA by the fact that they moved from milling paper to squashing welly boots, or whatever you do when you mold a welly, right through to doing telecoms cables, right through to what was once the state-of-the-art phone. And now they've, as I say, routers and gooters in mobile networks.
Okay, not so bad. All right, we'll move on to some more modern.
Yeah, let's do it.
I suppose is a fair summation.
I'll kick you with a few, and you tell me. I'll tell you, I saw a few here, and I know you've been reading up on it, and I'm going to choose two from a pile that we were looking at. Big old pile of headlines in the corner of my Wall Street headquarters. So the first one I'm going to ask you is that there was an announcement from Snowflake, a business I know well and I'm a shareholder in, that they've launched their own large language model called Arctic. What's going down?
Yeah, so this was described in the statement as a watershed moment by Snowflake's new CEO. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation here, Sridhar Ramaswamy. And I think he's actually a good place to start with this story. So there was a big shock when Frank Slootman stepped down as CEO. He was very highly regarded amongst tech CEOs on Wall Street. And it kind of, I remember the stock fell pretty swiftly when it was announced, because he was thought of in such high regard, but when his replacement was announced, it kind of made a bit more sense. So Ramaswamy was the CEO of the AI search engine Nevo, which Snowflake acquired, and he also ran Google Ads for a while before he started Nevo. So in putting him as CEO, Snowflake basically said, hey, look at us, we're also a major player in the AI space, and probably aren't being recognized for that as much as they should. So I always refer back to my conversation with Michael Lucas on Stock Club. I'm not sure when, at least probably last year. He manages an AI focused fund, and his main point on AI was that data and processing power were what he called the food and water that powers AI. Now we've seen the demand for processing power play out with chip companies, famously Nvidia chief among them, but you see Supermicroconductor, all of them have gone nuts. We've seen the CHIPS Act come into play. But on the data side, probably hasn't been the same tailwind. Snowflake is the most prominent public data cloud company for sure. I know there's Databricks there as well in the private markets. But it hasn't seen the same influx of demand. So to kind of inject itself into this space, I suppose it launched this LLM, which should go a ways to remedying that. So LLM stands for large language model. They're basically the foundation of generative AI. So what ChatGPT is built on, essentially. This is a way of thinking about it. So Snowflake's Arctic will be a way for businesses to come and basically do what they want on top of Snowflake.
So like do a podcast, for example. Come here to me, Snowflake. We had a bad tech start here. Would you just do the podcast and make it funny? That kind of thing.
You're making a joke, but it could be true. Like, we could go and feed it every old episode of Stock Club and then just type in what we wanted to say for 40 minutes. So if we come on sounding like robots next week, it might be because
we sound like robots this week, for crying out loud. We don't need a machine for that.
But it's really interesting. I know it just announced last week, but apparently in the test it was outperforming Facebook's Llama 3 and Llama 2, which has already been very impressive apparently in early tests as well. So, and it's also using half the training budget and significantly less computing power. So very early days, and it's obviously a competitive space, but it does look like it should be a very enticing new revenue stream for Snowflake. And I think more importantly, really injecting into itself that, we are an AI company, we have an AI founder, data is 100% central to the whole AI conversation, and we are the leading data cloud company. So it kind of is just maybe putting that step forward, drawing the line in the sand. And it took maybe the exit of an incredibly tenured and impressive CEO and Frank Slootman to do that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, AI's table stakes now. I mean, like the Snowflake have really put it up to like Crown Paints or whoever the last giant was. And it's back to your
Sherwin Williams.
It's back to your point earlier about disruption. It's just AI to me is the masterclass in disruption, because now we look and we hear all the stuff you just said, and we go, interesting. So suddenly Snowflake is a kingpin of AI, and we just don't know what's going to be said tomorrow. Like, we just don't know. It's a very fast moving space, and it seems that all things that were once powered by giant, slow data tables and backed by real human intelligence, there's something coming up behind them, and there's so many professions beyond podcasting that are about to really have their cards handed to them. That's very interesting.
Yeah, on that as well, I think the fact that these market leading companies now are all so tech focused, the thought of disruption is a bit more abstract, in the sense that Microsoft now is producing its own in-house chips to compete with NVIDIA. Do you know what I mean? Back in the day, we'll say oil companies dominated the early 2000s.
Yeah, for sure.
They weren't going to go build their own accounting software.
Yeah.
They weren't going to insource that. Whereas these companies now, they're so expansive. Amazon was famous for originally turning its expenses into income, essentially. And that's where AWS was born. And if AWS was its own independent company, it would be one of the leading tech companies out there. The fact that it's integrated into Amazon on top of that, we talk about Amazon's fulfillment network, is a similar story. So it's a really interesting conversation in the sense that we're talking about disruption and what happened with Nokia or Nokia. Could that happen now? Because Google was the great example where, we saw the power of OpenAI and ChatGPT, and we're like, was Google search going to go by the wayside? But Google has so much resources and so much expertise in the space already. It's going to be able to produce an equivalent.
Yeah.
So, like with AI in particular, I think it will just be this domineering technology that people with the most resources and expertise are going to be able to utilize the most. So it could be fair to say that the top companies, the power stake.
Yeah.
But again,
true. And especially as it's a exponential system, a properly mathematical exponential system that improves with time at a compounded rate. And there's very few other, I can't think of anything that improves exponentially other than AI, apart from investors' wealth once you compounding magic. But you know what I mean, from an industry perspective.
Compound interest.
No, but the compound interest within industry, it's a very complex thing, and like, you won't get compounded growth in ExxonMobil gas. You won't get compound growth rather in Chipotle. But it also shows that businesses that do something in the real world have by default a barrier to entry. Like, what's Warren Buffett said, that the best profession in the world is a barber, because people get their hair cut irrespective of whether there's a recession. And when you look at that particular profession, software, AI will never get rid of your barber shop or your hair salon. But it's definitely so as you said, the businesses at the top, the strong will get even stronger, despite us having seen in the last couple of years the birth of many multi-trillion-dollar businesses. More are yet to come. Right, let me hit you with another story. I'm going to put my hand into the story bucket, and I pulled out a name. Right, the next one I have is Bernie Sanders is going after Novo Nordisk for the price of the weight loss drugs Ozempic and Wegovy. What's going on with Bern?
Yeah, I'll spare you my awful Bernie Sanders impression.
No, don't. Please. Do it.
We're sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
That's good. That's good. AI couldn't have done that. That's great. That's a real... That it could not have been that crap.
Absolutely do that. Okay, so yeah, we know Bernie Sanders. He's the leftist senator fighting an uphill battle, I think is fair to say, against ultra-capitalism in the US. And he kind of just picks a new punching bag to go after. The current one is Novo Nordisk. We know Novo Nordisk is the manufacturer of weight loss drugs, Wegovy and Ozempic. It's kind of artificially inflating the Danish krona because they're making so much money. We heard about these miracle drugs, and thanks in no small part to their popularity in Hollywood and amongst celebrities. This is kind of where the problem lies. So Sanders described them as becoming luxury items, while in theory they're very necessary treatments to people with a very common affliction, which is obesity
and diabetes.
And diabetes, of course. So Ozempic was the first one to be introduced. That was back in 2017 to treat type 2 diabetes. That costs about just under $1,000 a month in the US. Wegovy, which is in particular aimed at obesity instead of just diabetes, was brought out in 2021 and it costs $13.50 a month. So if that's in the US, we're going to compare it to Ozempic is $155 in Canada and only $60 a month in Germany. For Wegovy, it goes for $140 in Germany and just $92 in the UK. Wow. So you can see why Bernie Sanders, I know he's fond of getting his knickers in a twist, but you can see why his knickers are in a twist, because it's crazy. And I think there are a lot of factors at play. It's obviously so common in the zeitgeist at the minute. America has a very different pharmaceutical industry in terms of advertising, in terms of access to drugs. Someone could see an ad on a bus and go into their doctor and request that they get prescribed it, which is just not how it works anywhere else in the world. So there are specific things that are the reasons why it costs so much in America compared to other places. But if you're kind of talking about the inequity of society and you're ring fencing what are incredibly powerful and effective drugs only for the rich, it really brings into question a lot of things. But more so than that, it's actually costing the taxpayer millions as well, because these drugs are prescribed through Medicare and Medicaid. So if those drugs are so highly elevated, it's a serious issue, because they could legitimately be prescribed to 20% of the population tomorrow. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? If you take into account how many people are on Medicare and Medicaid, I think it's 50-60 million, we'll say, in the US alone, and they're all going to have to pay $13.50 a month for these drugs. So something probably will come to a head. Sanders I think Novo Nordisk were involved in this as well. He went after the price of insulin, which was subsequently brought down.
Oh,
so
interesting.
We could see some price reductions in the future. It's not an empty threat.
No, it does. It does. Actually, he went on the rampage, I would say, about a half a year ago with AbbVie, who are the makers of Humira, which is a TNF inhibitor, and he did a tweet which showed the price of Humira in markets all around the world, and it was like the one you just described there. It was like $50 here, $60 there. And in America, it was multiples of thousands. And this TNF inhibitor is a life-changing drug for those who have, as I understand it, too many white blood cells, and they have all types of inflammation conditions. And in fact, it's the first drug in the world to cross 10 billion in sales. So it's beyond a blockbuster. And in fact, I was talking, and he went off and he actually went after AbbVie for the price that Humira, for the price of Humira in America. But funnily, fast forward to recent times, I was talking to a friend of mine, and they were in America, and they are coincidentally a patient. So it's an Irish friend of mine. They are coincidentally in America. They were also a patient of of Humira. And in Ireland, as a lot of our listeners will know, the most a household can spend on prescribed drugs in a month is something like 90 euro. Beyond that, the state pays. So, it's an incredibly fair system if you or your household has a high drugs bill. But anyway, this individual, my friend, went to America, brought their Humira, dropped it and it exploded, and they had to go into a drugstore to try and buy a biosimilar or another shot of Humira, and the price that they were quoted was $6,500. $6,500 for a product that is critical to this individual's quality of life, and that they're better just hopping on a plane and going home to Ireland. I mean, the inefficiencies, the excess cost, there's so much you can double click on there. But it is illustrative of the very point that you just made, which is in America, it's just a different system. The whole thing, Medicare, Medicaid, health insurance, private health, it's like it's its own ecosystem that's developed in its own way. That's very different to Europe. So certainly America got a lot of things right, and it has one-upmanship on an awful lot of things on Europe. But one of the things in Europe we've done very well is to manage how the inequity, I suppose, of drug treatments and prescriptions.
Yeah, it's mad. Like, you could fly to London, pick up your script and fly home, and it would be cheaper.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, no question about it. Right. Anyway, look, there's our headlines. Let's not bother it anymore. Mike, I don't know if there's enough headlines to keep everybody titillated and listening. Let's do a deal, or big no, whatever we call that thing, deal, big deal, no big deal. Do hit me.
Before I hit you with that, just a quick reminder from our friends at Vodafone Business to check out their free one-to-one digital support and advice service today to discuss a range of topics from social media tips, cybersecurity, and building a website for your business. So just search Vodafone VHub or click on the link in our show notes.
I'll just go into them.
Okay.
I mean, at this stage, if any of our listeners have not gone into Vodafone, they need to go into Vodafone. Get in there and say Emmett sent you and Mike insisted.
Okay. Big deal or no big deal. So, I thought this would be a good story because we talked about self-driving cars 2 weeks ago. So Mercedes is the first company to sell level 3 self-driving cars to customers, aka so the driver doesn't need to watch the road while the car is driving. Big deal or no big deal?
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. I mean, we've spent so many podcasts here talking about how the future of autonomous driving belongs to Tesla or some of the other companies, and there you go, Mercedes just go, there you go, level 3, mic drop. It's a very significant step in the advancement of self-driving tech, beyond the level 2 automation, which we discussed in a recent podcast, and Tesla's been embroiled in different legal spats, and I think even a sad case where someone died, and with level 2 you're driving, your self-drive requires constant driver supervision, I mean to say. But Mercedes has received approval from the state's DMVs in California and Nevada to sell these vehicles, and it gives this is basically regulatory acceptance of autonomous vehicles. This is the sheet of ice, if you were, has been fully cracked, and cars are now out there.
I think fully cracked is a big statement. No, do we not discuss that it's going to be in very specific places? So
yeah, but hold on a minute. Fully cracked might be a little bit much. That means that it's approved everywhere all the time, and I agree that in California and in Nevada the road network is a little more suited, I suppose, to fully autonomous. But it's certainly that kind of, I can sit in the back of the car and eat a bucket of Häagen-Dazs pralines and cream while looking at the back window. Like that, you can. You're thinking of use case straight away. Yeah, but anyway, now Merck now they've done level 3. They're like, level 3 is so yesterday. We did that last week. We're now on level 4, and that's no joke. They're now talking about level 4, which offers total autonomy without human intervention unless the system fails, and this would be an even more significant leap in autonomous driving. So we're watching. We were talking about disruption, and what's ultimately being disrupted here? The driver. Like every car needed at least one person holding the wheel and looking out the window with generally one foot that operates. And we're now looking at that. That's a disruption. I can't remember. There's so many. Who was it? Yeah, Coca-Cola, I think, once said that their greatest competitor was water. And when you kind of look at the industry, this is disrupting the driver. So there's we're watching it. It's happening. It's evolving in front of our eyes. And so I think it's a big deal. What would you think? Do you think it's a big deal or no big deal?
Yeah, I mean, these areas are already being served by driverless cars with Waymo's robotaxi fleet.
Yeah, that's true.
In California and Nevada. And I think Arizona, I wouldn't be surprised if Arizona was next on that list as well. I know it's common there as well.
Okay.
But the difference in training sets, I'm being a dampener without giving enough credit for how big of a deal it is. Do you know what I mean? You could be driving down, I don't know what it's called, PCH highway from San Francisco to LA, and there's a fella beside you with his feet up, half asleep. Like, do you know what I mean? That's incredible, and we have to give credit to that. But what I mean is that these areas have been trained. These cars have been trained on these areas. These cars haven't been trained from Galway to Sligo at the N17.
Yeah, you're right. I mean? That whole head for Turin and not thing, Jesus, going down the middle of the road, grasses and under the car. No, it's different. It's a different kettle of fish. And there's no rain in Arizona. Not that there's deluges, but like in Ireland, we get our own brand of rain. It's kind of half on, half off, half the time. It certainly would mess with the best of autonomous drivers, I'd reckon.
I'm just withholding my excitement for a bit, I think.
You're a tempered man, Mike. I admire that. I admire that about you. You don't get too hot and bothered, and you don't get too excited about nothing. So come here, I'm gonna hit you with a deal, no big deal. Google has announced the initiation of a quarterly dividend. Imagine, is this a deal or no big deal?
Emmett, I've never been more excited about anything in my life.
Touche. There you go. Oh man, that puts me off to edit out my last statement. But I know I'm absolutely pretty stoked myself. Come on, let's go. I'll see you in the pub. Let's go.
Yeah, I'll see you there. I can afford 1/8 of a pint maybe with my Google dividend coming in.
So how big is the dividend? Tell me, what's the story?
It's like 70 cents a full share. It's not significant at all, but it's interesting in the fact that Facebook, I think it was last quarter, wasn't it? We were talking about that it initiated its first dividend as well, and I think it was funny because Zuckerberg was there on the call announcing a dividend while he would get paid about 700 million quid a year from said dividend. Wow. So not a bad position to be in, but both companies issued it for so long until they became these $1 trillion companies, or in Google's case, $2 trillion, because they always felt that they had these reinvestment opportunities. They were happy to do buybacks, but felt no need to do a dividend on top of that. And mostly because like buybacks very much suit a company's numbers more so than a dividend does. You know, a dividend is very much a shareholder perk rather than a company perk, we'll say. So yeah, I just think it's an interesting trend. Google was the home of the moonshot, you know?
That's right.
They'd rather spend money on the most outlandish things they could think of, literally, than hand it back to shareholders. And this was a critique of the stock for a long time. Not that it mattered. It still absolutely shot up the whole way while people were complaining about it. But it's interesting that they feel that maybe they've matured enough to finally start issuing a dividend. Like, what does it say about management's ideas on future growth prospects? Or is that reading into it too much? Is that being a bit cynical? I'm not sure. Maybe they just realize they're not going to get many acquisitions over the line anymore. We've seen how stringent they've been on big tech acquisitions. Yeah. So they don't need to keep as much of a cash pile. I don't know. It's not a huge deal, and it's not going to make or break deciding to invest in Google or not, but I just think it's an interesting trend, and I'm wondering, are Larry Page and Sergey Brin and Zuckerberg kind of seeing the tea leaves a bit more than we are now, and what's is there an underlying current there that's maybe motivating?
Bingo, I agree with that. I agree with what you just said there, Mike. I mean, whatever about motives that might be concerning their business opportunities and ability to do other stuff with the cash, but I think you're on the money there, that when you look at Facebook is doing it now, Google is doing it, and frankly all the big mature techs are doing it, I think it's a sea change that's suiting the mood of the moment. Like, the mood of the moment now is just make more money and hand it over to your shareholders. Like and that I think I think that's exactly it. I think it's certainly not for the founders enrichment. They don't need anything more. They have all the money they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. But I think it is the mood of the street, as it were. And yeah, it's quite interesting to see who else is going to move down that alleyway. I think they all have now. Who hasn't? Which one of the tech giants? Amazon hasn't. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Tesla hasn't.
They're reporting that. I don't know if Tesla ever will, but Amazon are reporting this evening, so we could be proved either wrong or right.
Tesla's only a minnow compared to those lads at this stage.
Yeah, it is.
Anywho, right, go on. What up?
Okay, do you have a sneak peek?
Oh yeah, did we get our jingle? We never got a jingle sorted for Sneakity Peek. It has a ring. But anyway, look, as I said,
it would just be me doing a Bernie Sanders impression.
That's good enough. Well, as I said here before, Mike, I think our $99 a year service invest will prove to be the greatest subscription anyone will ever make, bang for the buck, because the subscribers get 52 deeply researched ideas delivered every week, every Tuesday. It's a 3-minute read. Well, next Tuesdays is something else. It really is something else. Sales have grown in this company by 45% CAGR over the last 3 years, and it's a big company. Its return on equity has increased from 3.6% to 29% in the same time frame. Anyone who reads this Charging and Fearless, as you know, Mike, will immediately know that this opportunity is growing so fast. But guess what? No one else will have thought of it. They'll be like, I never spotted that in front of me. There it is. Like, this opportunity is one of those things that's growing outlandishly in plain sight. And certainly from an investment perspective, to say it's one of my favorite in ages has a caveat for reasons that those who subscribe will find out, because you have to understand where's your moral boundary. And there's a little bit of another clue. It's an amazing stock. As businesses go, it's out to do good in a space that some could argue ain't a whole lot of good, but wow, it's got some growth.
Yeah, okay. So that is part of our invest service. All right, before we finish up, just another thank you to our friends at Vodafone Business. If you're a business owner in need of a leg up when it comes to your digital transformation, just get over yourself to Vodafone VHub and book your appointment today. You can find the link in our show notes or just Google VHub. Emmett, thank you very much for joining me today. And remember, folks, we're still running our offer for all pod listeners. So if you just go to MyWallSt.com, you'll receive a full deep dive on one of our favorite deep mode stocks. But if you go on to our Invest Plus service, you'll get 50 quid off your investment today. You'll also get your full Charging and Fearless there, so you'll be able to see Emmett's stock that he's talking about within the Invest Plus service, plus our stock of the month, which has beaten the market by 5x, I think. No, sorry. We're up 5x on our stock of the month service compared to the market, which is about doubled. So all of that is part of your Invest Plus service, and you will get $50 off with the code StockClub50, all caps. So StockClub50 at checkout. That's it. If you're still listening now, leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to us on, and thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.
You're still listening, come on, Mike, we gotta believe.
If you're still
we gotta believe in these people.
All right, we'll see you. Talk to you next week.